thank you very much, everyone who's attending. We were asked today to present some of our work here at Art Analysis and Research. We're an international company with offices in New York and London, and we're looking at all aspects of materiality of works of art. Most of the examples I'll be presenting here will be paintings today, as that makes things a little bit simpler, but we also have a full laboratory, so if we feel we have knowledge, we're happy to help with various different kinds of objects as well as paintings. So to start in, looking at art, the context of what we do in the art market, we feel we have an increasingly important role to play as the art market changes and develops. The art market recently is a massive sector of international finance, and annual art sales continue to expand. They also are getting continually higher as prices of desired objects go up and the stock available goes down. In this kind of atmosphere, we have more uncertainty with lots of people trying to take advantage of this, producing forgeries, trying to sell things with mistaken attributions, or trying to promote unknown paintings into the work of more famous painters for financial gain. On the other side of the scale, authentication has become increasingly difficult as authentication boards suffer more and more from the threat of litigation. And a lot of connoisseurs have become very hesitant in offering their opinions as to authenticity. So leaving a lot of players in the art market with a difficult position if they have a piece of work that's without provenance, perhaps not with the easiest history to deal with, where can they go? And we very much, so I'm just going to put my timer on. We very much feel that our authentication, by means of combined techniques, including material research, offers the best possibility to get full information about artworks and to deal with the present changes in the market. So as the COVID situation has also come into being in recent times, this has only encouraged the tendency that we're already seeing in the art market going more and more to an online context where works of art are being sold only online, depriving the buyer of the possibility to actually see the object in person, which presents another set of new challenges. So recently, the Art and Finance report published by Deloitte concluded that 83% of wealth managers see authenticity, provenance, and attribution issues as some of the greatest risks in the art market. Art professionals are echoing this sentiment, with 81% saying that these are major risks. So clearly, there's a need for different approaches and more evidence-based information to support safe trading of fine art. Now, when you're going into a deal in the past, our field has really been based a lot on trust. Gentlemen's agreements. The art market has also been called the last unregulated area of finance. And in fact, it has for a long time been somewhat less business-like than other businesses. But we're seeing, because of the prices and the seriousness of collectors buying art as investment, we're seeing this changing, and we're very much into supporting the idea of trust and verify, not only because this provokes better trading and allows financial transactions in the art market to be made with certainty, but also on the other flip side, it protects the cultural heritage that we have, increases our understanding of works of art, and allows us to better care for them and preserve them. So how do you get authentication if you need it? So traditionally, authentication can be based on at least 1, 2, or 3 different areas of investigation: connoisseurship, provenance, and art analysis. Now, if we look at each of these, they all have their limitations. Connoisseurship is potentially inconsistent. It can also be a bit, have a tendency to have political implications in connoisseurial boards, for example, who once issued an opinion are often very reluctant to change it and prove themselves wrong. The quality of connoisseurial information available will vary from artist to artist. There's definitely these days, as mentioned before, a aversion to the risk of litigation. And appraisals in valuing objects are also made using connoisseurial judgments and are made on readily apparent identity. And as we know, what's apparent is not always definitely what something is. So if we look to provenance, looking to the past history of objects, again, it's extremely useful and excellent to have in place where it exists. But for many markets, it's just not available. And even for those where it commonly is, there are definitely exceptions. It will not pick up forgery. It tends to be much less effective for works of art made pre-1945. Doing provenance research can be very time consuming. There will be gaps in the records. Documentation can be forged. And it doesn't protect against switching out works of art, which is one of those things that does indeed occasionally happen. We've seen occasions of that here, where works of art have been shipped and a replacement, a copy, generally very well made, has been shipped back. So how can science be useful in this context? Well, scientific analysis is the use of scientific tools combined with the historical context to understand material objects, not just the stylistic aspect or the historic aspect. So it's really a supplementary additional set of evidence that can really support connoisseurial opinions. It provides evidence-based information based on localization, date, author, and condition of works of art. So we do this by using scientific tools to identify material aspects of works of art, dating, for example, in some cases, identifying materials such as pigments, binding media, metal alloys to create historical chronologies. All of these different aspects allow us the ability to more accurately date objects, as well as to occasionally place them into their geographical boundaries. So it's geochronological localization of works of art. That's our ideal goal in trying to do these exercises. And as this then obviously would imply, it's not just the science. What we do is very much founded in what's now known as technical art history. And we have a lot of experience with researching and investigating all the technical literature, everything that's been published on art and artists and materials, and putting this all together with taking samples that interrogate the object in the way to get the answers that our clients need. So this relationship between these three components is often sort of summed up as a three-legged stool, supporting the attribution, dating, condition, and value. However, it's a little bit of a simplistic model, and it doesn't really show the complexities of the relationship. So I've suggested a new one, the paddling duck model. It's about what you can see and what you can't. So if we take the example of the duck in the water, we can see the front of the duck, which represents the object present, what's currently visible to the casual observer. We have the past, which is what provenance addresses, but then we have the problem of what we can't see, that which is hidden. So the duck under the water is sometimes, as we would expect, just a normal duck. Everything's conclusive, works together, no problem, but in a lot of cases, there's other evidence that we can find with our particular approaches that just aren't available in the domain of connoisseurship and provenance, which look at the visible, we're looking at the hidden. So we're looking to find signs of extreme restoration, signs of forgery, and on the flip side, signs of authenticity, aspects of an artwork that will tie it to the hand of a particular master, strengthen the connoisseurial opinion, and give evidence-based information to making judgments based on connoisseurship regarding the dating, authorship, and localization of works of art. And in doing this, we feel that using these three approaches combined can get us a much stronger insight into the nature of an object than just one or two alone. Now, on top of this, going forward into the future to really secure the art market, we can think about securing these judgments as in the past, as we've seen with our experience working in this market for some decades, is that oftentimes if a client doesn't particularly like an opinion they get, they can discard the information, move on, or just simply by inattention, records will become lost over time. This is not desirable. We'd like to have a full verifiable chain of ownership and of investigations that have been done. And to help move the art market towards a better model of secure information on the objects that we trade and study, we're looking into different solutions using blockchain systems, also catalog raisonnés supported by technical research that basically allow evidence to be stored and maintained in a very secure, permanent fashion. Now, scientific art analysis in the art market can be really used to do many things in many different contexts. If we just roughly run through the different aspects of the market where we work, we're looking at authentication issues, but in many different domains, protecting buyers by checking objects before they take possession, helping sellers by helping them make a better case for the condition and authenticity of their works, and protecting artists' legacies by contributing to the knowledge of technical techniques and uses of materials, changes in materials over time. So really contributing in various aspects of the field. Now this can be used to, in the online world, as we're becoming increasingly more virtual, we can also function as an independent verification source. So that we have no financial stake whatsoever in the objects we're working on. When we do our work, we're providing pricing to our clients based on the work we do, not the value of the object, which allows us to remain independent and provide the kind of trustworthy factual information that our clients need. And this can then be used to support these various kinds of functions. So if we look at the different contexts our work may be used for, appraisals, lending, and insurance are becoming increasingly important. Working practices of artists go into catalog raisonnés, which then help the authentication process further. We provide a very important role oftentimes in providing forensic evidence in legal cases, which I'll be showing a few examples of going forward, and assisting in establishing the condition and preserving artworks, which is important, again, in buying and selling, but also in terms of transport, in securing insurance claims, in choosing the right kind of packing and exhibition conditions. Really understanding a material can help in so many various ways that it's important that we do talks like this so that we educate people working in the art market as to the various possibilities. I myself studied art history, art conservation, and applied arts when I was younger, and none of this was part of my curriculum in earlier times. So we're very happy to be invited to talk today because we see the importance of trying to reach out and to establish a dialogue with the art market as we go along. But most importantly, we want to enhance the value of the works of art that we deal with in various ways, financial, knowledge-wise, securing the art market. There's many, many ways that our information can be worked, which is why securing it in secure storage systems, passing it on properly, and making it available in a form that our clients can understand and use are very primary and important goals for us. So how does this work in the real world? If things are going ideally, how does our work help? Well, one very nice case to present that we worked on is this particular painting, which was brought with no provenance out of a private collection and presented to the Kandinsky Foundation when it was still formed. It's now been disbanded. And the Kandinsky Foundation was rather uncertain about it as a new work with no provenance. It was a bit atypical, not exactly what Kandinsky's known to have done in his more prominent phases. So they asked if it could be brought to us so they could have a technical verification to allow them to do their work in certainty that they weren't dealing with a forgery. And as we did our work, we were able to find that the materials were fine for the painting, perfectly of the period, should be around 1913. We also did various kinds of technical imaging. The image you see here is transmitted light. And we also did infrared and X-ray, allowing us to see below the surface in different levels and capture different kinds of hidden materials. And by doing this, we were able to reconstruct the aspect of the design hidden under the surface, because this particular painting, this portrait, is rendered over a harbor scene. And in fact, all this information together allowed the Kandinsky Foundation to securely authenticate the painting, which is now in the addendum of the Catalogue Raisonné, because they knew that this particular sketch exists in the artist's notebook of that particular date. And on the end here is the actual notebook page showing what he had drawn. Clearly, the match is extremely close. And just to make it a fairy tale perfect story, after we submitted this report, Provenance Research then unearthed some letters from Kandinsky's wife, Nina. And it turns out that this portrait was the one described in these letters, in which she describes it to a friend as a portrait my husband did of me that I didn't much like, and we left it at home when we moved abroad. So the painting had gone unknown for many, many decades. But when all this work comes together, this is the outcome that we hope for, a support of the connoisseurship, the provenance, and the technical information that results in a much better understanding of the work, as well as providing then sort of data points, which we can then use to help verify other works of art by the artist. So some of the benefits of what we do, just very quickly presented, just to give you an idea of financials sometimes involves. My colleague Nika Gutman-Riepi in New York was one of the lucky scientists who was able to look at the Leonardo da Vinci Salvator Mundi, which went from a very low value to a very high value, eventually up to 450 million, the highest amount ever achieved by work of art at auction. Peter Paul Rubens's Massacre of the Innocents was another work that we looked at, again, increased incrementally in price. If we find forgeries, we protect the investment of the buyer by identifying them at an early stage, allowing money to be returned if something's been sold mistakenly. And in other cases, as the Kandinsky, such as the Pechstein at the bottom, will work with foundations and authentication boards in order to make sure that a work of art is entering the Catalogue Raisonné of the artist with well-documented certainty, and not allowing fakes to slip in that would misrepresent the artist's historical legacy. Now, one of the questions we commonly get asked is, can you do a single test and find out what we have here? People like the idea of a single test, and this may come from TV shows, which often show authentication attempts with what's called the art gun, which is a simple elemental analyzer, which can obtain certain information from an object, but works of art are much more complicated than simple elemental data obtained by a surface reading. So our protocol that we use is very much based on knowing the historical context of different objects, what sort of information is going to help us reveal the information that our clients need, where to look, how to look, the smallest amounts of material to be taken. And it very much relates to the kind of investigations that bring together the right tools at the right time, so you don't get the wrong impression. Oversimplistic investigations can really lead you down very wrong and dangerous paths, especially when we're dealing with high value objects. Small quantities, for example, of titanium found in the painting or polychromy of certain objects have put researchers off and made them think they're modern, when actually, if you know the contextual information, titanium is actually quite common as a trace element in many historic earth pigments. So it's really about giving our clients that background evidence that we know what we're looking for and we know how to look for it. what's significant and what's not significant. And I like this particular illustration, which is the blind man and the elephant. Each looks at a different bit of the elephant and gets a completely different impression of what it is, which is very much the case of what can happen if someone approaches a work of art without the proper context. And this is why we like to stress we do art technology as well as scientific investigations, because putting a scientist in front of a work of art is not a very effective way to get the answers you need, but putting someone with conservation training, with scientific expertise, and with a technical art history background in front of an object and speak the language of the art market, you get very different answers. So what tools do we use? Very quickly, we use imaging and we use material analysis. Now, imaging has long been accepted within the field. These are some images we did of the Van Dyck self-portrait in the National Portrait Gallery in London when it was acquired for the nation. It went really into popular use in the early 1900s, which helped drive the foundation of museum labs and took up interest in using technical means to study works of art. And here in our lab, we have various kinds of imaging at our disposal, the standard ones being X-ray, ultraviolet, infrared, transmitted IR, which allow us to see through the painting, through parts of the layers, perceive overpainting using different wavelengths. We also have a laboratory full of various kinds of analytical instruments, which allow us to look at both inorganic and organic compounds. And we've spent long years studying objects. And what our protocol involves taking the smallest amount of material for the maximum information. So maximum information with minimum effect. So here on the slide up to the left, the little white arrows pointing out an example of the sample size. It's actually quite a large one because it's a chip rather than a powder scraping. We take very, very, very tiny amounts of material to do our work so that it should be not visible to the naked eye in most cases for the kind of work we do. And even these tiny samples, widely taken, give us a very in-depth view of the physical nature of works of art because of the different kinds of multi-analytical techniques that we use that support each other, much like the provenance research connoisseurship scientific analysis can support each other. We're using organic analysis techniques, inorganic analysis techniques, visual observation of pigment particles, many different kinds of investigation techniques that allow us to bring the information together in a meaningful way. So this approach has really been accepted for a very long time. The Rembrandt Research Project is perhaps one of the best known, oldest, most well-established examples of this kind of research taking place. It began in 1968 and still is ongoing with attributions and deattributions still occurring. Here, an example of half of an X-ray of a painting that we looked at earlier, showing a typical feature for Rembrandt, the fact that he liked to paint over abandoned compositions of his own work. So in this case, under the man with the plumed hat lies the head of an old man or a trony, which is completely concealed by the overlying picture. And this kind of work, seeing another work typical of Rembrandt under a painting that should be by him, it's this kind of visual information as well that allows us to make a strong case for objects being authentic or not. Now, while we know that connoisseurship is an important part of this construct, there's areas where you really need scientific analysis to make certain distinctions. And one area, for example, that artists have long done, here an example of Kusama, earlier, some of the surrealist artists engaged in this practice, which is working in an older style at a more modern date. So it's known that some artists, well, several decades after they've moved on stylistically, produce a few, or maybe more than a few works in the earlier styles if they're doing better on the market than what they're currently producing. And of course, for dealers and collectors, they don't want to invest in newly made works in that style. They want to buy authentic pieces of the period, whereas it's not forgery per se of the artist's work, it's forgery of the time of making. So looking at dating, for example, canvases with techniques such as carbon-14 dating, which is very effective for works of art from the second half of the 20th century forward, due to radiocarbon dating, we can really help assist to order the output of living and recently deceased artists to give more structure to their catalog raisonnés and understanding of their output. Now, when it comes to forgery per se, of course, our techniques have to keep growing and have to be increasingly more sophisticated, because unsurprisingly, given the amount of money involved, the sophistication of forgeries has also grown incrementally in the last time. Wolfgang Beltracchi is oft cited. I'm going to cite him here again. He's one of the forgers that we helped bring to justice. His particular work went on over 3 decades. He worked for more than 30 years and is known as perhaps one of the most prolific forgers and most financially successful forgers of all time, earning, speculation goes, somewhere over 30 million euros. In this particular case, which was the painting that brought him down, provides a particularly nice example. This is a forgery of a Campendonk that sold at auction, sadly, for the highest price a Campendonk had ever achieved at auction, euro 2.8 million at the time. And because the work of art didn't come with a certificate of authenticity, when it was brought to the foundation, the expert who was authenticating Campendonks, she said, well, this doesn't have a great provenance. I'd like to know that I can look at this, secure that I'm making a right judgment. Can we have a scientific analysis? It came to London for this analysis, having been through the hands of other labs who hadn't been able to pronounce it a forgery. And we were able to find that the ground contained titanium white pigment, which was a pigment produced after 1914, the date that the painting's dated at, and was an anachronistic element for this particular work. You can't paint something in 1914 if you have materials invented several decades later in the underlying layers. So this, for the purposes of the court case, was cut and dry. And this is one of the scary things about litigation with work in the art market these days. In certain contexts, such as Germany, the fake can be the crudest, most badly done thing you've ever seen, but courts won't accept commissarial opinion. They want hard evidence. And finding something like a material that wasn't available in 1914 is the sort of thing that allows these cases to be closed. So legal cases are certainly one of the areas that we can really most help with. But Beltracchi was able to get away with what he did for so long by studying provenance and producing stickers, historical stories about family collections that these paintings came from. He faked the provenance. He got a certificate of authentication from random art historians who are willing to provide such before works were brought to auction. He had his wife and several other people working with him. And he also studied the material history of paintings. So he was producing what he thought was science-proof forgeries. So these paintings are actually quite complex in many cases to look at, to prove that they're forgeries, which is why we need to stay on top of our game in order to do this. Happily, we've managed to do so, and it's very, very, very difficult to fake the right kind of age support, the right type of materials in the surface, the right kind of aging and cracking effects. To get everything in line is extremely difficult. So while these things are more and more difficult to unearth, we still feel strongly that we're more than up to the challenge. And here's Beltracchi himself, nothing like Campendonk in the early 20th century with one of his works. Now, one of the things that we've been very much involved in recently that allows for security in the art market is trying to protect from forgery by producing technically based catalog raisonnés. So again, this combination of provenance, connoisseurship, and material analysis, providing a very rich and detailed set of information on works of art that can help in their authentication and de-authentication if necessary. Now, the Russian art market is one of these markets that's been very much shaken by repeated and multiple forgeries being sold and making it into large collections. An example of an early case that stimulated this project I'm going to tell you about is this example of what should have been a Larionov that was offered in Stuttgart in 2007, showing two lobsters on a table in a still life, which does indeed look a lot like a Larionov. In fact, there's one in the Museum Ludwig, which is the basis, we think, for this. And they thought two lobsters was better than one. Obviously, the details of the wallpaper have been reproduced. It's not a direct copy, it's a pastiche, it's a version of. So this sort of based on, with, again, like Beltracchi, with forged provenance, with dubious experts in some cases signing on for certificates of authenticity, really led to a lot of uncertainty in the market. So a group of serious collectors decided that one way to address this would be to encourage proper study of works of art in this particular area, beginning with the works of Natalia Goncharova and her husband, Mikhail Larionov, the author of our lobster painting that we just saw. And they founded a charity that now gives financing to different research projects decided on by a scholarly board that work to produce information that supports a catalog raisonné attempt that's slowly gaining and information on these two artists whose work has been baked and forged many, many times in recent years. So the funding was used for us to go in our particular project to look at a group of authentic works, indeed 14 works by Goncharova and Larionov in the Museum Ludwig in Cologne. And we gave them each very standardized, very thorough scientific tests, looking at them with technical imaging, looking at the pigments, looking at the binding medias, dating the canvas supports, noting all the provenance information, working together with the museum to really found a sound technical basis. And this material is now online on their website for the Russian Art Research Project, also known as RARP, and can be consulted and used to help verify other works by these artists going forward. So catalog raisonnés are really one serious way that we can learn a lot about works of particular artists, and also at the same time safeguard their trading. And in this particular case, of course, we made a lot of very interesting discoveries along the way, such as changing the dating of some of the works, finding previously unseen underdrawing, finding, like some of the works we saw earlier, paintings lying over abandoned compositions. And so it really enriched the historical understanding of the works of art as well. And here a picture of Petra Munt, who's the head of paintings conservation to the far left at the Museum Ludwig, myself and Verena Franken, who is a project conservator for this project. Nicholas Eastaugh, my colleague, is missing. The two of us spent many happy days in Cologne looking at their wonderful collection of artworks to produce the results that we did. Now this is a strategy we're following for other occurrences as well. We've done similar work together with the Joseph Albers Foundation, helping them in their catalog raisonné create a base understanding of Albert's working techniques, his material choices, and features they can use to identify his working practice that will help them if they have the threat of forgery and if they have to take people to court as part of protecting his heritage. They now have a protocol to do so. And again, this was a wonderfully integrated way to work. We're doing similar work with Modigliani There's a new catalog raisonné project going forward with that, where we've looked at many paintings by that artist, again, to establish technical correspondence using a very static, detailed investigation protocols so that the results are very much intercomparable and can be really used to form strong bases of forming kind of serial judgments embellished and supported with the technical information when the art historians are deciding what's going to go into the catalog raisonné or not. We're also suggesting this sort of technique for many of the growing areas of the art markets. For example, some of the markets in the Middle East where 20th century artists don't have the kind of provenance information that our European counterparts do. Doing technical analyses is one of the few ways that we really can find evidential information to help support some of these artists who are becoming very collectible in recent times, and again are suffering from a lot of forgeries being made by people who wish to profit from the boom in the market. So wherever there's a gap, people will move to fill it, and we need to have protocols ready to address that. But in terms of how we can go forward, I think, as you've seen, doing this sort of information can support the traditional assessments that have been made in many ways, filling some especially egregious gaps, such as providing hard opinion for legal cases, for really securing art in the online context as that goes forward, not only by being able to categorize works of art more effectively in terms of their condition, in terms of their authenticity, by citing material aspects that, that support the connoisseurial intention, but also with providing physical evidence that allow objects, individual objects, to be linked to the blockchain as things become secured on different databases going forward. Because again, a computerized system is only as good as our ability to link it with the physical object in the real world. So working with the material object becomes increasingly important in that context already. Again, a lot of what we do is really looking at ways to help objects to be recognized for what they fully are, which helps to make all sorts of judgments more securely, how best to ensure, how best to conserve, how best to buy and sell in a protected, information-rich environment. So all these different features will and can be, hopefully, used more frequently and integrated in a more confident manner as players in the art market become more familiar with the kind of options that are available to them when they're using technical tools as a means to support their different kinds of interactions. And should there be questions, we're always here and happy to answer them. My email is on this slide, should anyone have anything of particular interest, and I'd be happy to discuss anything in this talk further now that we're concluding.